All right, I think we're live. Um, Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks Sam for being here. Thanks
Yeah,
SCB for organizing this marathon of the day, which had some great sessions. So super excited to host Sam from Alameda Research, FTX. I'm Kenrick. I'm the founding partner of LuneX Ventures. We are a crypto venture fund based in Singapore, investing in early stage crypto startups. But not about us today. It's about Sam and his company. So um, I think for the benefit of most people here, I think we have quite a few people on the stream probably who are relatively new to the crypto world. Like, could you just intro? Because you have your fingers in a lot of different projects, companies, right? So there's Alameda, there's FTX, Solana, Serum. Like, how did you start them? Why did you start them? And then kind of how do they fit all together?
yeah, totally. So, my name is Sam Bankman-Fried. Prior to crypto, I was a trader for Jane Street Capital, trading international ETFs. I got into crypto in 2017, and started up Alameda Research, which is a crypto quantitative trading firm. Basically because there is, a real lack of liquidity, in the space, and a ton of arbitrages. So started building that out. And then in 2019, started up FTX, which is a crypto derivatives exchange, um, because there were some in this space, but there's a lot of issues with the current derivatives exchanges, at the time, and they're a huge fraction of the volume, more than half the global crypto volume. And so we started building that out, over the last year and a half or so. And then over the last 6 months, I've been helping to spearhead Project Serum, which is a decentralized ecosystem built on Solana.
Got it. And you've also made a number of acquisitions in the crypto space, right? Particularly over the past year, we
Yeah,
saw acquisitions of BlockFi and Sushi. What's kind of your longer term vision for all of this?
yeah.
What's your end
So
state?
so there's a number of different things going on, and I think that when you look at um, uh, when you look at sort of the investments that Alameda's made, there are 50 or so projects that's been a minority investor in, and many of those were just helping to build out the DeFi ecosystem, or as strategic partners, or something like that. Um, when you look at the bigger ones, I mean, there was Blockfolio, which we acquired earlier this year, um, and it's one of the most active, one of the most used crypto apps, uh, and with a really large loyal user base, and but one that could really use really use a technological partner for basically matching engine exchange stuff, and generally being able to offer more financial products to their ecosystem. Um, and then other things. I mean, it's all over the place. Obviously, Serum is a project that we've been spearheading, and a lot of the other projects in the Serum ecosystem we've been helping to advise and some invest in as well. Um, and then you look at something like Sushi, which was something where I sort of like called in to shepherd it through its through sort of a tough time, before handing it back off. And so really it is sort of all over the place with different stories behind each one. Um, but when you look at the core ones, the biggest things that have sort of been shepherding over the last year, a lot of it is about finding different building blocks to help build out either the FTX ecosystem or the Serum ecosystem.
Makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I think you're one of those like rare people, or maybe one of the only ones who sits across, who is the CEO basically of both a centralized and a
Right.
decentralized exchange, right? So, kind of curious to hear from you. Um, in your experience, how have the use cases or the users of those two different systems, FTX versus Serum, how have they changed over time? And like, do you see very different
Yeah,
use cases, users in the two ecosystems?
totally. So, um, you know, I think we do, and I think I see like a pretty different vision for them in some respects. Where I think FTX, really the long-term vision of it is to become one of the world's premier exchanges. And so, it's one of the bigger crypto exchanges. It's been growing, pretty quickly over the last year, and really looking to keep that growth up, to keep growing it up, to keep scaling it up, with the goal of it becoming a top, not just a top crypto exchange over the next few years, but even more than that, an exchange for other assets. And you look at the same rails that are used for crypto exchanges make sense for a lot of exchanges more generally. And in fact, crypto them itself is like really good rails for an exchange. And if you look at sort of the technology involved in a crypto exchange, you have a ton of great on ramps and off ramps, matching engine, risk engine, customer base, products, and all of these other things. And so FTX has recently launched tokenized stocks as well. And prediction market contracts and things like that. Um, and I think really the vision is to keep growing that, keep growing FTX's footprint. And that's very much sort of a centralized exchange vision. I mean, it's may the products are decentralized, but the exchange itself, it's a centralized company. When you then look at what is Serum, there is a DEX on Serum right now, and it's I think it's really awesome in a lot of ways. I mean, it's sort of in some ways revolutionizes what a DEX can be, in that it's massively faster and cheaper than sort of any other DEX with massively higher throughput, and it has sort of the ability to function, similarly to a centralized exchange in terms of performance. And I think that's a huge step forward. But I don't think of Serum as a DEX particularly. It's just a DEX. It's really is a full ecosystem, with that just being one piece of it. And when you look sort of more generally at it, the vision for Serum that I think I'm most excited about, and the most ambitious one, is one where there's a whole ecosystem, a huge ecosystem built on it, with potentially a billion users and $10 trillion of assets, where all of the products are interfacing with each other. They're all composable. All of the applications can build on each other and grow off of each other, and they're all on-chain, censorship resistant, open. And I think that has huge potential. And I think that a DEX is just one piece of that. And so I think that it's a pretty different type of thing even than a centralized exchange. And I think that when you look at what the when you sort of look at what a centralized exchange is best at, right? It's really the core exchange business. And when you look at DEXs, I think that the vision for them that's most exciting is when they're part of an ecosystem. That's all on the same chain and can compose with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if do I understand correctly, your vision of the future would be maybe in the shorter term, over the next few years, it will be most of the volume or most of the activity will happen on centralized exchanges like FTX, but then in the longer term, you'll have a much broader, wider ecosystem of dApps and applications interacting potentially with the decentralized exchange like Serum.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't want to say that confidently that will happen. I don't, no one knows the future here. But I think in the world where DeFi gets huge, that's what happens.
Yeah. And how do you see Serum interoperate with other chains? Are you particularly bullish in the longer term on cross-chain DeFi, or do you think it will be kind of contained to one or two chains? Yeah.
It could go either way, obviously. The advantage of cross-chain obviously is that you get potentially more adoption. The disadvantage is that you sort of break composability across chains. And so this magical thing you get where anything can interface with anything else in the ecosystem, that starts to get weaker when you cross chains, and you start to lose a lot of that. And I think that you lose a lot of what makes DeFi exciting. And so, I do expect more cross-chain infrastructure to be built out over time, but I'm not sure that I see that as. I think it's an open question what'll happen there. But I think I've gotten less excited about cross-chain infrastructure over time relative to composable components.
Okay. And the way that you're positioning, or that Solana and Serum are currently positioned, is basically it facilitates basically high throughput trading of financial assets currently, right? That's kind of the initial use case of them.
Yeah, and I think that, like, when you look at like, Solana is the blockchain that Serum is on right now, and yeah, Solana's role there is to perform all the blockchain functions. But particularly, it's to be able to do that in a super performant way. And so when you look at what's important for a blockchain, like, it depends on what you're asking it to do. But if what you're asking it to do is to sort of, like, eventually attempt to scale up to 1 billion users, like, that, the only way that can possibly happen is if it's really high throughput. Like, the only way that you can get to this sort of, like, upside case is one where the chain is handling a ton. And so I think that just the long-term scalability of the chain is incredibly important. And it's in addition to being important, I think it's not something that all chains are even aspiring to. And so, if you think about, like, what you need to have long term to get there, you need to be scaling up to hundreds of thousands to 1 million transactions a second. And I think that's, like, faster than what's currently considered fast, so to speak. And one of the exciting things about Solana is that not only is it currently probably the highest throughput blockchain at like about 50,000 TPS, but it naturally scales with Moore's law, and the community team are really actively working on optimizing it in other ways to kind of squeeze as much out of it as possible and get it to the point where it will be able to handle even more over time.
Yeah. And I think another interesting kind of perspective you might have sitting across like a centralized and a decentralized exchanges, how regulatory changes are going to impact this, right? Like, what are the specific differences you see, and do you see any attack vectors emerging for DeFi specifically?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you think about attack vectors in DeFi, people think a lot about some specific ones, and people think a lot about like bugs in code that can be exploited, and that's definitely a thing that happens. Also, though, sometimes, like, coins just go down a lot, and it's not exactly an attack vector, but it, like, the amount of money lost to quote unquote rug pulls is certainly a lot more than the amount of money lost to hacks in DeFi, which is sort of interesting, right? And it sort of makes you question what the important, like, where the focus should be. And I think more generally than that, like, I mean, you have these sort of borderline things, right? The harvest finance thing, where the code did exactly what it was supposed to, except, like, no one thought really hard about exactly what it was supposed to do in some cases. And it's, like, unclear whether exactly what the right word to describe it is, exactly whether it's like hack or, like, well, you have an on-chain managed fund with, like, without a lot of, like, thought going into exactly what trades it's doing. Sometimes it'll do really bad trades. Like there's a fine line there. And but even bigger than any of those, like, what do I think the scariest thing for DeFi is? I don't think it's hacks. I think the scariest thing for DeFi is it just never scales, and it just never builds amazing shit, and it just never gets to where it wants to go, and it just sort of, like, slowly, like, loses excitement over time. Like, that's how most things end. Not with a with a bang, but with a whimper. And so I think that, like, all of these things are, like, less important than building amazing shit and building it well and building it in a way which will scale.
I think so. We've seen over the past couple of months, but in particular, like, more scrutiny from the regulators in terms of KYC and AML, and you get all these kind of blockchain monitoring solutions in place, particularly at centralized exchanges. Right, you have the travel rule for VASPs to VASP kind of communication of transferring of client information. Do you think those things will impact DeFi eventually, and how? Like, does at some point there's going to be regulators who say like your front end to a DEX, like we're going to shut you down, but it's taking down the website, doesn't take down the DEX, right? Like how far do
Right.
you think this go? Where will this happy medium kind of?
It's a really good question. I don't know. I think anyone who gives you a very confident answer to that is full of shit. No one knows. Like, right? Like regulators don't know. I mean, this is like they're trying to figure this out, and I think there are really interesting questions here. And so like the biggest thing I'll just say is like the world will have to wait and see to some extent, and it's not going to be entirely passive, right? There are going to be conversations with regulators along the way. It's going to be work done. There's going to be bills drafted, laws proposed, feedback periods. It's going to be a messy, long process in which the world tries to figure out how to contend with this. And um, in the end, I think that like a lot of this will depend on in practice what's going on. Like a lot of this will depend on like what is the main usage of these protocols. And what's the sort of like what's the value proposition there, and how how high is the risk for abuse by nefarious actors. And I think like you know those are all just going to be factors that go into this. But uh you know regulatory agencies are still trying to figure out what to do with centralized exchanges. I don't think they know what to do with decentralized exchanges yet. I do think that at some point though they're going to try and figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably coming. There was some regulation in an addendum to the Singapore Payment Services Act, which kind of hinted towards DeFi protocols, but it remains to be seen, I guess, how that will be
Yeah.
executed. But that pivots nicely, I think, into I heard you say on a different podcast or interview at some point that kind of the reason why you start a business, or like you want to create an impact in the world and do good in the world, right? And I think
Yep.
you said that the best kind of way to do that is to build a very profitable big business and then kind of be giving away, being altruistic after that, and kind of contribute to the good causes that you see in the world. So I think a lot of people were surprised, or pleasantly surprised, to also see you donate to the Biden campaign as the second
Yep.
biggest donor. So I won't go into like specific reasons or like the influence or whatever that might be. But let's just say you could uh, institute or prevent a specific U.S. regulation. What do you think would be best for
Yeah.
our industry?
I mean, it's going to be a lot of things. It's going to be messy. I think the biggest thing that I would say is, um, I mean, I think like locally, the biggest thing that I would think about is like coming up with a pathway and a regulatory framework for crypto derivatives trading and structured product trading in the US. Like right now, if you look at what the big things that the US is missing, I mean, it's a lot more regulated than other countries in a lot of ways in crypto. But some of those I think are kind of fine as is. I mean, I don't know what fine means exactly, but like when you look at like requiring MSBs and MTLs to offer crypto spot exchange in the United States, I think that's not crazy. That's totally within like a reasonable realm, right? Like that's something that a business can totally reasonably get if they try to, and has sort of like generally reasonable requirements on businesses. And so I think that like when you look at that, it's I I'm not saying it's a perfect process, but that's not what's causing a flight of crypto from the United States, right? The problem is like it's hard to offer almost anything else. And so when you look at futures, options, when you look at long tail tokens, when you look at crypto structured products, all of these things, pre-sales even, right, of tokens, like all of these things get so much messier in the United States. And so I think, and it's not because the SEC has said like, it's not for the SEC here. It's not because the CFTC or anyone has said like, we've decided that never shall a crypto derivative touch our shores or anything like that. Like, it's just like the framework doesn't exist really right now for it. Um, and that's holding back a ton of volume from the states. And so I think like locally, I would, if I were the CFTC, I would be thinking about like, all right, realistically speaking, what do we want to require? Let's just like write a pretty clear document, which is like, here's if you're thinking about launching a crypto derivatives exchange in the United States, here's what you gotta do. Like you need to look at these licenses, like here are the bounds and restrictions on it, and here's sort of the TBD, like stuff we haven't figured out yet, but we at least want to give you some color on it, and like acknowledge that we don't know what the answer is here, but that we are going to be looking at it, and like don't go too egregious there or anything like that, and sort of like release that to give to give players looking to do that a pathway, and sort of like okay, now we sort of like know what we need to be doing, and how to launch these products in the context of a U.S. regulatory regime. I think that'll come. It's just like isn't really there yet, and so I think that that's like the first thing that I would focus on.
Are you with the appointees you've seen to date from the incoming administration? Are you optimistic that it's going in the right direction across the different alphabet soup of agencies? Or
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's like neither going like strongly in the right or strongly in the wrong direction. I think that's like really what you would expect as a prior from like a Biden administration, is like no one sort of accuses Biden of being like the most radical or like you know like out of nowhere politician in the world. Like sort of no one is expecting completely wacky cabinet choices, and I think that's like what we've seen generally. We've seen like pretty expected standard ones in a lot of cases, and I think that what that means is like it's sort of like um like thankfully we haven't seen appointments of anyone who's like just clearly on a warpath against crypto. We also haven't seen high profile appointments of someone who has like really laid out everything you'd want to see for a crypto regulatory infrastructure. I think like frankly most of the appointees don't think about crypto that much. It's like not what's at the top of their mind. And so I think what that means is that it's I think sort of the optimistic case, that the thing that you're hoping for here is that they'll sort of take it as like yeah, this is sort of a new thing. We're open. We're open to discussions here. We're open to talking with industry players, to doing some research on it, to getting some specialists in the area, and to collaboratively coming up with regimes that make sense and that are productive. And I think that like that is totally consistent with what's happened so far, but it's not at all a guarantee. I think that's, and I think some of that's on us too. I think some of that is like, regulators are humans, and if like, if they're sort of a new area and every time they try and wade into it, they just get giant middle fingers. Like the response isn't like, oh, okay, sorry, no, not gonna go there then, right? The response is like, well, fuck you. Like you're not willing to work with us at all. Like we think we don't like some things you're doing. You're clearly not going to be constructive. It's like, fuck it, we'll just enforce them, right? And so I think like that's not what regulators want to see, and that's not what you want to show them, right? Like what both sides want is a constructive dialogue, where people inside the crypto ecosystem are like, look, here's the things that are important to us. Here's what matters. Here's the things that are kind of weird, but if you haven't thought about them much, but really you should think about, because they're going to inform this a lot. And then regulators say, look, here's what's important to us, and like let's come up with a regulatory regime that can allow the ecosystem to really grow, and allow this to become a hotbed for it, while making sure that it doesn't that it doesn't do things that are just like really bad. And so I think like that's the dialogue that you want to see. I think it's on both sides to help foster that dialogue.
Okay. Cautiously optimistic, but you won't be moving to Wyoming anytime soon yet. That's
right. And I think that like in contrast to, I mean, it's I think you've seen the past administration like way higher volatility on this, and there's some pretty prominent Republican appointed or elected officials who are really pro crypto and have been advocates for it. And there are also some who seemed like they might be trying to take a gigantic swipe at it on the way out, and sort of, I don't know. It's like I think it's pretty clear that there isn't one party which is massively more pro crypto than the other on average in the United States. Like every metric comes back like, I don't know, kind of similar-ish. But there is a spread there, and I think like if I had to guess, I guess on the Republican side there's a higher spread, and the Democratic side more of a concentration in the middle, as far as crypto regulation goes.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, just a few minutes left. Just wanted to ask you very quickly. maybe about an exciting project that's building on Serum right now. So
Yeah.
we participated in that as well, which is Bonfida, and they're looking to build out a more friendly kind of UI UX experience for people. What is your kind of vision for them? What made you excited about them?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that are necessary for decentralized ecosystem to take off, and like the first thing is there has to be some product. Like there has to be something that is trying to take off. You can try and make something out of nothing. You can make token price out of nothing. Sometimes that's what your goal is. But whatever. Like so okay, so that's that. And there's some super exciting tech on Serum, right? Like it just has like the most high performance stacks in the world by far. But that's also not enough, right? What else do you need? Well, you also need to have customers. As I think is a separate, really interesting topic. But on top of those, you also need to present it well, and you need to put your best foot forward. And user experience matters a ton. I mean, that's one of the most consistent pieces of feedback we've gotten at FTX. Is like, what was the best thing we ever did? We put a little bar on trading pages, so with one click you can switch sub accounts. People fucking love it, and it solved so many problems that people had. You could do it before; it just took like 6 clicks instead of 1. And it's just big. And I think like when you look at sort of the suite that Bonfida is building out, it's sort of a portal to the Serum ecosystem, and it's at once it's sort of both that just has like cleaner, clean, well-built, intuitive interfaces to things, and it also has interfaces to a lot of things. I mean, the set of things that Bonfida provides a portal to is very big, including some that it's built out itself, like Solvable. And so what I think it's shaping up to potentially be is, a really great portal to a lot of different pieces of the Serum ecosystem all in one place. And so rather than having to scrape together 4chan forums or whatever you're doing to try and like figure out what the projects are and how do you use them and things like that, it presents like a really nice, clean, unified interface for composing them together in a way which is like a really cool user experience. I don't know what'll happen long term, but I think like right now, that's what it's best at. And I think it's doing a good job both of building the individual interfaces and of covering a really broad swath of territory with that.
Makes sense. We'll call it the Cash App of DEXs.
Yeah.
The all aggregator. Fantastic. Awesome. This has been great. Thanks so much, Sam, and thanks again for SCB for hosting. I think our time is up. So thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you.